Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
They grew up sharing everything: toys, secrets, and a bond that seemed unbreakable. But when their mother passed away, leaving behind a single-family home, that bond didn't just bend, it shattered. How does a lifelong friendship turn into a legal battlefield over four walls and a roof? Today, we're looking at the heartbreaking reality of the inheritance feud and the lessons we can learn about family, pride, and the true cost of winning.
The air in the living room felt heavy, thick with the scent of lilies and the lingering silence that followed a long illness. Julian and Clara sat side by side on the velvet sofa, their shoulders touching, just as they had when they were children hiding from a thunderstorm. For the last 3 weeks they had been a united front, rotating shifts at their mother's bedside, whispering shared memories to keep the quiet at bay. Now the hospital bed was gone, and the house felt cavernously large. "I can't believe it's actually over," Clara whispered, clutching a faded throw pillow to her chest. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her voice a fragile thread. Julian reached over and squeezed her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "We did right by her, Clara. She stayed in the home she loved until the very end because of us. That's what matters." They spent the evening drifting through the hallways like ghosts of their younger selves. They laughed softly over the height marks carved into the kitchen doorframe and debated who had actually broken the ceramic lamp in 1998. In this sanctuary of dust and memories, there was no room for the outside world. There was only the we, the two of them against the void their mother had left behind. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long orange shadows across the hardwood floors, Julian looked around the room. "We'll figure the rest out later. The paperwork, the logistics, it can wait." Clara nodded, leaning her head on his shoulder. "As long as we're together, we'll be fine."
The atmosphere in the lawyer's office was a sharp contrast to the warmth of the family home. The room was cold, lit by humming fluorescent bulbs, and smelled strongly of old paper and industrial cleaner. Julian and Clara sat in stiff leather chairs, facing Mr. Henderson, their mother's attorney for over 30 years. He adjusted his glasses and opened a thick manila folder with a heavy sigh. "Your mother was a very traditional woman," Mr. Henderson began, his voice echoing in the small room. "She wanted to ensure that her most precious asset, the house, remained a source of stability for both of you." He cleared his throat and began to read the document in a rhythmic legal drone. Julian listened closely, expecting a simple 50-50 split that would allow them to sell the property quickly. However, as the sentences unfolded, a look of confusion clouded Clara's face. The will stated that the house was to be held in joint ownership for a period of no less than 5 years. It further specified that any decision to sell or renovate required the unanimous and written consent of both parties. Clara's heart sank. She had been counting on her share of the sale to pay off her mounting business debts. Julian, meanwhile, felt a surge of relief, as he had secretly hoped to move his own family into the old neighborhood. The silence that followed the reading was no longer the comfortable silence of shared grief. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of two people realizing their goals had just collided. "So," said Clara, her voice sounding thin and distant, "we are stuck with each other?" Julian didn't look at her. He simply stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. "I wouldn't say stuck, Clara," he replied softly. "I'd say we have a responsibility." A week later, the siblings met at the house to begin the grueling task of sorting through their mother's life.
The air was stale, and the house felt different now, less like a home and more like a collection of objects with price tags. Julian walked through the kitchen, running his fingers along the edge of the granite countertop. "I've already spoken to an appraiser," he said casually, not looking at his sister. Clara stopped in the middle of the hallway, a cardboard box in her arms. "An appraiser? Julian, we haven't even finished the laundry." "It's just to get a baseline, Clara," he replied, his tone defensive. "We need to know the market value before we decide how to handle the maintenance costs." Clara set the box down with a dull thud and looked at the floral wallpaper she had helped her mother hang 10 years ago. "Market value? This isn't just a building, it's our childhood." Julian sighed, pulling a notepad from his pocket and jotting down a few numbers. "I'm trying to be practical, Clara. The roof needs work and the taxes in this zip code are skyrocketing." Clara felt a sharp sting of resentment as she watched him measure the rooms with a laser tool. Every time he clicked the device, it felt like he was erasing a memory and replacing it with a figure. She picked up a small porcelain bird from the mantel, their mother's favorite, and tucked it into her pocket. "Are you going to put a price on this, too?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. Julian finally looked up, but his expression was guarded, like the stranger's. "Everything has a value, Clara. The sooner we accept that, the easier this becomes." The bond that felt unbreakable just days ago was now being measured in square footage and repair estimates.
The tension that had been simmering under the surface finally boiled over on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. They were in the attic, surrounded by dusty trunks and the heavy smell of mothballs. Clara was carefully wrapping delicate teacups in bubble wrap when she found the silver jewelry box. "I remember Mom saying she wanted my daughter to have this," Clara said, her voice filled with nostalgia. Julian stopped moving a heavy chest and wiped sweat from his forehead. "Actually, Clara, Mom mentioned to me that the silver set should stay with the house." Clara froze, the bubble wrap crinkling loudly in the small, cramped space. "Stay with the house? You mean stay with you if you end up living here?" Julian didn't blink. He just stood his ground, his arms crossed over his chest. "I'm the one who stayed in town to help her while you were building your career 3 states away." The words hit Clara like a physical blow, sharp and unexpected. "Is that what this is about? You think you've earned more of her things because you lived closer?" "I'm saying I put in the time, Clara. I know what she wanted better than someone who visited twice a year." The "we" they had cherished in the first week was officially dead, replaced by you and I. Clara stood up, her face flushed with a mixture of betrayal and sudden cold fury. "You've been planning this, haven't you? You're using her death to settle old scores." Julian let out a harsh, dry laugh that echoed uncomfortably against the rafters. "I'm just being realistic, but I guess that's a language you don't speak." For the first time in their lives, they looked at each other and didn't see a sibling. They saw an adversary. The conflict was no longer contained within the 4 walls of the family home. By the following weekend, 2 new voices had entered the fray, turning a sibling rivalry into a strategic war. Julian sat in his modern kitchen, listening to his wife, Sarah, as she scrolled through property listings on her tablet. "If you don't stand firm now, Julian, Clara will bleed the estate dry to pay for her failing business," Sarah said firmly. She pointed at a spreadsheet she had created, highlighting the potential rental income of the family house. "This isn't just about memories anymore. This is our children's college fund we are talking about."
Meanwhile, across town, Clara was sitting in a dim cafe with her partner, Mark, who was a frustrated real estate agent. "Julian is gaslighting you, Clara," Mark whispered, sliding a business card for a high-end litigator across the table. "He wants to live there for free while the property value peaks and then buy you out for pennies on the dollar." Clara looked at the card, feeling a wave of nausea. She had never imagined needing a lawyer to talk to her brother. But Mark's logic seemed sound, and Sarah's influence on Julian made him appear colder and more calculated every day. The rational advice from their partners acted like gasoline poured onto a smoldering fire. Neither Julian nor Clara realized that their partners were projecting their own financial anxieties onto the situation. When Julian called Clara later that evening, his tone was formal, coached by Sarah's insistence on boundaries. Clara responded with a rehearsed sharpness, using the legal terminology Mark had drilled into her head. The intimate shorthand they had developed over 30 years was replaced by the stiff language of a business transaction. They were no longer two people mourning a mother. They were two puppets being pulled by different strings. The bridge between them was burning, and for the first time, neither of them wanted to put out the fire.
The weekly phone calls stopped, and the shared text messages disappeared from their screens. In their place came a steady stream of formal envelopes delivered by couriers who didn't care about the family's history. Julian sat at his desk, staring at a notice of intent that Clara's lawyer had sent via certified mail. The legal jargon was dense and cold, stripping away the names Julian and Clara and replacing them with petitioner and respondent. It felt as though a thick paper wall was being built between them, brick by heavy brick. Every time Julian wanted to pick up the phone to ask Clara a simple question about their mother's garden, he stopped himself. His lawyer had warned him that informal communication could be used against him in a court of law. Clara, too, felt the suffocating weight of the silence, but she was too proud to be the first to break it. She spent her evenings reviewing bank statements and property tax records, looking for any leverage she could find. She found herself wondering if Julian was sleeping in their mother's old room or if he had already started painting the walls. The uncertainty bred a new kind of paranoia that distorted every memory they had together. Was Julian always this greedy, or was she only seeing his true colors now that there was something to gain? Was Clara always this impulsive, or had her financial desperation turned her into a stranger? They were no longer talking to each other, they were talking at each other through the voices of strangers in expensive suits. The house sat empty and quiet, a silent witness to a bond that was being shredded by legal motions and affidavits. What used to be a home was now a contested asset, a problem to be solved, rather than a place to be loved.
The sun was unusually bright the day the professional estate liquidators arrived at the house. Julian stood on the front porch, his arms crossed, watching strangers carry his mother's dining table across the lawn. Clara arrived 10 minutes late, her tires crunching loudly on the gravel driveway as she came to a sudden halt. She stepped out of the car and saw a woman in a beige blazer holding a clipboard directing the removal of the piano. "Wait! That piano isn't supposed to be sold!" Clara shouted, her voice echoing across the yard. The woman looked at her clipboard and then back at Clara with a practiced, neutral expression. "I have a signed order from the executor's representative, ma'am," she said, nodding toward Julian. Clara turned to her brother, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "You told them to take it? You know I played that piano since I was 6 years old, Julian." Julian didn't move an inch. His voice was flat and devoid of the warmth that once defined him.
It's a bulky item, Clara. The appraiser said it's not worth the cost of professional moving and storage. This isn't about the money, you coward. You're just trying to hurt me because I won't let you keep the house. A small crowd of neighbors had begun to gather on the sidewalk, whispering as they watched the spectacle. Julian took a step forward, his eyes flashing with a cold fire that made Clara instinctively take a step back. I'm the coward? You're the one who hasn't paid a single cent toward the property taxes while I've been keeping this place afloat. The argument wasn't about fairness anymore. It was about who could inflict the most damage before the sun went down. By the end of the afternoon, the lawn was empty, the furniture was gone, and the two siblings stood on opposite ends of the driveway. They had successfully protected their interests, but they had utterly demolished their dignity in the process.
The house was finally empty, stripped of the rugs, the paintings, and the familiar clutter of a lived-in life. Without the furniture to absorb the sound, every footstep Julian took echoed like a drumbeat against the bare floorboards. He walked into the kitchen and noticed the pale rectangles on the walls where the family photos used to hang. The house felt smaller now, as if the walls were closing in on the ghosts of the memories that remained. Clara entered through the back door, her silhouette framed by the harsh afternoon light streaming through the uncurtained windows. She didn't offer a greeting, and Julian didn't look up from the kitchen island he was leaning against. They were there for the final walkthrough before the keys were handed over to the court-appointed property manager. The air was thick with the smell of floor wax and the cold, metallic scent of an empty refrigerator. I found a marble under the radiator in our old playroom, Clara said, her voice sounding hollow in the vacant space. Julian looked at the small, dusty glass sphere in her hand, but made no move to touch it. It's just trash now, Clara, he said, though his voice lacked the sharp edge it had possessed during the auction. They walked through the bedrooms in silence, noting the patches of dust and the scuff marks on the baseboards. In their mother's room, the absence was the loudest. The space where her bed had been felt like a physical wound. For a fleeting second, their eyes met, and the shared grief of Chapter 1 threatened to resurface. But the memory of the legal threats and the cruel words spoken on the driveway acted as a shield. They were no longer the people who had sat on the velvet sofa 3 months ago. They were strangers inhabiting familiar skin. Clara turned away first, her heels clicking a sharp, lonely rhythm as she headed toward the front door. The house was ready for its next chapter, but the story of the siblings had reached a stagnant, silent end.
The legal battle reached its conclusion not in a crowded courtroom, but in a sterile conference room on the 12th floor of a downtown office building. The mahogany table was covered in thick stacks of paper, each one requiring a signature to finalize the sale of the house to a third-party developer. Julian sat on the left side of the table, flanked by his legal team. Clara sat on the right, her eyes fixed on the silver pen in front of her. The court had finally ordered a partition sale, meaning neither sibling would get to keep the house, and the proceeds would be split after legal fees were deducted. Mr. Henderson, looking older and more tired than he had months ago, slid the final document toward the center of the table. If you both sign here, the escrow process begins and the deed is officially transferred, he explained quietly. Julian picked up the pen first, his hand steady but his face pale as he scrawled his name across the bottom of the page. Clara followed suit, the scratching of the nib against the paper sounding unnervingly loud in the silent room. When the last page was turned, the lawyers began shaking hands and packing their leather briefcases, their jobs finally finished. The siblings stood up simultaneously, but instead of the relief they had expected, they felt a profound, heavy emptiness. They had fought so hard to win that they hadn't realized the prize was being dismantled piece by piece during the process. After the commissions, the hourly legal rates, and the taxes, the fortune they had argued over was significantly smaller than they had imagined. They walked out to the elevator bank together, but they stood at opposite corners of the small, moving box. When the doors opened at the lobby, Julian paused and looked at Clara, his mouth opening as if to say something, anything to bridge the gap. Clara didn't wait. She adjusted her coat, looked straight ahead, and walked out into the busy city street without a backward glance. The legal victory was complete, but as the sun set over the city, it felt like the most expensive mistake they had ever made.
"5 years had passed since the final signatures were dry and the keys were handed over. The old family home was gone, replaced by a modern, gray apartment complex with glass balconies and a keyless entry system. Julian found himself driving past the corner of Oak Street, his foot instinctively slowing on the brake as he reached the familiar intersection. He looked at the new building, trying to find a trace of the garden or the porch where they had spent their summers. There was nothing left of their mother's legacy, except for the land itself, which now belonged to 20 different families who didn't know her name. He had used his share of the inheritance to renovate his own kitchen, but every time he sat there, he thought of the silence between him and his sister. Clara lived in a different city now, and her business was finally stable, though she often wondered if the cost had been too high. She still had the small porcelain bird tucked away in a drawer, a lonely reminder of a time when the world felt safe. Neither of them had reached out. The paper wall they had built had become a permanent fortress of pride and regret. They had won the battle for the money, but they had lost the only people who truly understood their history. As Julian drove away from the site of the old house, he realized that the building was never the real treasure. The real inheritance was the bond they had shared, a bond they had traded for a bank balance and a sense of being right. The house was standing in a different form, but the family was gone, scattered like dust in the wind. Some problems can be solved with a check and a lawyer, but some losses are absolute and final. In the end, they learned the hardest lesson of all. You can always buy a new house, but you can never buy back a brother or a sister.
The house on Oak Street is gone, and with it, a lifelong friendship. It's a tragic reminder that in the heat of a legal battle, we often lose sight of what truly matters. Is there a price tag on a sibling's love? Julian and Clara found out the hard way that some things, once broken, can never be replaced. What would you have done in their shoes? Would you have walked away from the money to save the relationship? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to check the description box for the full vocabulary list from all 10 chapters. If this story helped you practice your English today, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life lessons. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. Goodbye.